It is my utmost pleasure and honor to be introducing our next speaker, Christopher Bailey, who is our Arts and Health Lead at the World Health Organization. Educated at Columbia University and the University of Oxford, as well as the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, Bailey was a working actor and playwright early in his career before joining the Rockefeller Foundation as research manager, and later at the World Health Organization, initially to create its first knowledge management strategy. He went on to create the first health informatics unit, lead the online communications team, and for the last few years has headed up the World Health Organization's Arts and Health program, which has assembled a network of academic centers, fostering and promoting robust studies on the health impact of the arts and the foundational bioscience behind it. He has performed original works such as The Vanishing Point, A Journey into Blindness and Perception, Stage 4, Cancer and the Imagination, and more at Lincoln Center, the Budapest Opera, and the Hamwe Festival in Rwanda, among many other venues around the world, as a way of walking the walk on arts and health. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Christopher Bailey.
There was a man of double deed who sowed his garden full of seed. When the seed began to grow, 'twas like a garden filled with snow. When the snow began to fall, 'twas like some birds upon the wall. When the birds began to fly, 'twas like a shipwreck in the sky. When the sky began to crack, 'twas like a stick upon my back. When my back began to smart, 'twas like a bent knife in my heart. When my heart began to bleed, then I was dead and dead indeed. When my heart began to bleed, then I was dead and dead indeed. That was a song that my father sang to me before going to sleep at night. And years later, I asked him, you remember that song that you sang to me? The one about the birds on the wall and the ship in the sky and all that? Don't you think that was rather grim? And he said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, what did it mean? What did the song mean? And he said, it didn't mean anything. It was nonsense. I said, then why did you sing it to me? And he said, well, because my father sang it to me. And I said, well, why did your father sing it to you? And he said, well, because his father sang it to him, and I don't want to talk about it. And I began to think about this, and it reminded me of this quote from Carl Jung that said, meaning is what allows us to endure. And yet here was a song that somehow endured generations in my family without having any meaning at all. Or at least no meaning that at that point in my life's journey I could create from it. So my name is Christopher Bailey. I'm the Arts and Health Lead at the World Health Organization. And our role, as was mentioned in that very kind introduction, is to look at the evidence base for the health benefits of the arts. And to that end, I've helped create something called the Jameel Arts Health Lab, which is a network of research centers around the world that looks at the evidence base, but also through WHO translates that into guidance for countries. And we have seen around the world in the last really year or two some tremendous strides that have gone unnoticed in the public discourse, but are real bellwether changes in this space. I keynoted a conference in Australia at the beginning of the year that coincided with the launch of the first national cultural policy in decades in Australia. And as part of that policy, every single care home for the aged and the elderly now includes an arts therapist. That's a change. In our work in Europe, we had a program called Music and Mums, which began as a small RCT in the UK, and we expanded it to national pilots in Romania, Denmark, and Italy. And this fall, we're going to reveal the data with the EU, and if the numbers hold up, there's already a commitment to make it a national policy, a continental policy throughout all of Europe, of using song to help mothers who are managing postpartum depression to find a way forward. In the United States, we saw last September an executive order coming from the White House that called for an all-of-government approach to investing in cultural institutions, museums, performance groups, libraries. And if you read it carefully, that third paragraph gives the rationale, and it's to improve individual and community health. That is a huge change. This is happening all around the world. I was just in Nigeria 2 weeks ago and witnessed firsthand the work that's spreading around that country as well. I saw in the Sickle Cell Institute data showing how sickle cell, which are deformed cells of this genetic disorder, which 1 in every 4 Nigerians have, they clot up at the joints and create intense pain and suffering. Listening to music creates that dopamine effect, which actually dilates the blood vessels and relieves the acute pain of sickle cell attacks. So tremendous examples of the data informing policy at the local and national level. And last month, I was invited to Ireland to open in Waterford their very first National Arts and Health Resource Center. And then afterwards, I went to Trinity College in Dublin to keynote Creative Brain Week. And this was an emotional time for me because it was the first time I'd ever been to Ireland. And on my father's side of the family, they were all Irish. I was the first person in we don't know how many generations to actually physically return to the country. We have very little information in our family about what our family's history was. Alcoholism runs in my family. My father was an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic. I don't drink. I broke that chain. My sons don't drink. And so if you were to write my epitaph and put what is the greatest accomplishment of Christopher Bailey's life, that would be it. That's breaking the chain. But also in my family, you have this history of social activism. My great-grandfather co-founded the American Civil Liberties Union. My grandmother was a social worker working here in California in San Francisco. And so there was this combination of social activism, but also illness, this alcoholism. And of course, being Irish, we didn't want to talk about it. So this was all the background of coming to this place, having no information about my past, but the sense of transgenerational trauma. And lo and behold, what was the theme of Creative Brain Week in Dublin? It was transgenerational trauma. And I began to think about the stories I was hearing from the Troubles and how, because of the history of civil wars and civil unrest, things like public records were destroyed. So there was no data on family lineage. It had all been wiped out in many cases. The active suppression of local identity, wiping out family histories. And little wonder that many generations of people did have a recourse to alcoholism. It kind of reminds me of that old Rat Pack joke when Frank Sinatra says to Dean Martin, "Dean, why do you drink so much?" And Dean says, "Frank, I drink to forget." And Frank says, "Why? What happened?" And Dean said, I forgot. So how do you find healing when there's no history, when there's no discussion of it? So there I was listening to these stories of people who had lived through the Troubles, and this one man about my age talking about how when he was a little boy, a bomb exploded in the building next door to him, and the glass shattered, and it permanently scarred his face. And he didn't even mention, was the bomb Protestant or Catholic? Was he Protestant or Catholic? Because it doesn't matter. And then we heard what the government was doing to try and heal this transgenerational trauma. And one of the methods, and one of the reasons why I chose this theme to talk about it, was from earlier in the day, hearing this theme pop up, was this notion of the redemptive quality of awe. And there's a great social prescribing movement that's happening in Ireland now, where people who have been affected by the violence, part of the solution is to re-enter the countryside. And it begs the question, what is awe? Awe is not the sound you make when you see a cute puppy. Awe is when you are facing something larger than yourself, and you feel your insignificance, but rather than having that be a negative thing, you feel that you're a small but essential part of a larger whole. That is awe. And when you think about it, when we're born, we have this essential selfishness where by necessity, by evolutionary necessity, everything is about us. And we cry, we charm, we smile in order to get food, comfort, love. It is a self-centered universe that we're born into. And yet, particularly in tribal societies, there comes that point in the maturation process where you go on a vision quest, where you go out into the wilderness and you find a pattern that shows you your place in the universe, where suddenly it is not only about you anymore, but what you can contribute to the whole. And that's a shift. And awe is nature's way of rewarding us for that maturation step. It's a shot of oxytocin that is the bonding hormone, and it's what happens at the end of a musical line where an audience feels a common sense of shared attention. It creates community, and then when you're alone, the community is the earth itself. But it's not just spatial. Aristotle, in his definition of catharsis, talked about awe. Awe is that moment of shock, or catharsis is that moment of shock and awe, when at the end of the narrative of the play, all these elements that had remained unseen, suddenly there's a moment of revelation where you see the pattern. And there's a surprise, a shock of that revelation, but then when you see the pattern of all the events that led up to it, there's that moment of awe, where you feel that you are a small part of this larger story. And in that case, the awe isn't spatial, it's narrative. And in music, when you have a line of music, and there's the anticipatory chord progressions that lead you in and give you the dopamine effect, when it resolves in a way that is surprising but inevitable, that's when you get the oxytocin and that sense of awe. And in music, it's often a sense of time. Jean-Philippe Rameau, the Baroque artist, talked about how when you listen to music, you have a memory of the note that's been played, the experience of the note that's being played, and the anticipation of the note that's about to be played, and it's already forming a chord in your mind. Our sense of time exists in the temporal lobe. Both past and future are actually in the same part of the brain. On the one hand, it gives us a tremendous evolutionary advantage because we can learn from the past and we can plan for the future. But it comes at a terrible cost because with our sense of past comes a terrible sense of loss. And with our sense of the future comes a terrible sense of greed, of dread and anxiety. But in music, when past, present, and future become a harmonized whole, rather than a fractured, separate state, it literally has the effect of healing time. Healing broken time. So as I'm listening to all these different approaches, I expressed my story, and there was a colleague there from Belfast who said to me, well, why don't, tell me where your people were from. Do you know? And I said, well, my son did a little bit of genealogical research and found out that our ancestors came from a place called Antrim, north of Belfast. And the only pieces of information he could find was that our people were dispossessed from the land during the enclosure movement, and then moved to England and became factory workers in the Industrial Revolution. She said, well, why don't we go to Antrim and see what we can find? So we went to Antrim, and we looked at Google Maps, and we thought, what is there to see? And the only sort of monument was this thing called Antrim Castle. So we went to Antrim Castle, and it was this beautiful park, and we wandered around, and we saw people pushing strollers and joggers, and we asked, so where's Antrim Castle? And they said, oh, we don't know. And I said, well, are you new around here? No, we walk here every day. We've never seen a castle. So we see this hill, and we go up to the top of it, and it's this view of all the row houses and the cathedral and the town spread about it, but no castle. So then I see this ruined wall with a flock of birds on it, and I said, well, let's go there. And we see a plaque next to it that said, this was the site of Antrim Castle, which burnt down in 1923. It no longer remained. And as I'm reading this, I see the flock of birds fly up and form this fractal pattern in the sky. And I was reminded of that song that my father sang to me as a child. And I looked it up on Wikipedia, and it turns out that that song was the first children's nonsense rhyme recorded into English, and it came from Antrim. Oh. This song, I came to Ireland looking for some kind of clue to my past, and what I found was that there was no clue there, but I had all the information I needed within me in the form of a song. Thank you.